began fighting over Mr. Johnson, and Mr. Johnson was told that
Look at them. Look at them. Look at them. But they all supposed to be gangsters, right? They all supposed to be G's. They all supposed to be official. Look at what they doing. Squabbling, fighting, going to war over another man's booty.
Really the hottest nigga, you gon' respect this lava. I'm shooting it if I pull it, boy, make sure you want this drama. I bring it to you like it's Law and Order SVU. Turn you to a vegetable, now you look good inside a soup. Family come from Bishopville, but I grew up in that Bronx Zoo, where they shoot you dead in the street and then dance all on top of you. And I do what I gotta do.
Started. Please don't get me started. Started.
the Tongo Blast Gang and Unit 18 targeted him for sexual victimization. A Tongo Blast Gang member named Eric Carbonneau began threatening Mr. Johnson with violence unless he submitted to sex. The Crips and the Mandingo Warriors also began demanding sex from Mr. Johnson. Starting in August 2001 and continuing for 5 months to December 2001, the Tongo Blast Gang Mr. Johnson. Only Tongo Blast Gang members were allowed to use Mr. Johnson's body during this time. During this period, Mr. Johnson fell into deep despair and hopelessness. He frequently considered suicide. December 1st, 2001, the Tongo Gang ordered Mr. Johnson to perform oral sex on an inmate in 18R dorm. Sergeant Barnett found Mr. Johnson in this inmate's room and issued a disciplinary report against Mr. Johnson for being out of place. As a result, Mr. Johnson lost recreation and commissary for 45 days. On December 5th, 2001, Mr. Johnson filed another step-on grievance requesting safekeeping and protection. On December 5th and December 30th and January 16th, desperate for help, he wrote letters to the senior warden pleading for protection. He received no letters, no response, nothing. December 13 that year, Mr. Johnson went before the UCC committee again for a 6th life endangerment hearing. Prior to the hearing, an inmate named Gilstrap, a member of the Mandingo Warriors gang, forced Mr. Johnson to put makeup on his face before he attended the hearing. The committee for this life endangerment claim consisted of defendants Bowman, Cuyava, Rangel, and somebody else. When Mr. Johnson entered the hearing room, defendant Rangel laughed derisively and told Mr. Johnson to remove the makeup. Bowman told Mr. Johnson, if you want to be a you'll get treated like a go get you a man, preferably a black one since it's the bloods you're having a problem with lately. Cuyava added, you ain't nothing but a...
Just know, where's the human compassion, yo? Where's the human compassion, man? I think it's because this is Texas, and Texas is still a discriminatory place against non-white people, and also because it's a very religious state. Some would say it's along the Bible Belt. They had extra reason to not have concern for this man's life, unfortunately, man. It's like, he filed papers like 20 times so far, just to be placed somewhere safe where nobody will harm him. And all they told him was, get a man. It's just sad, yo.
Dirty tramp. Learned to fight or accept the FUCK, and Cuyava concluded the hearing by insisting that the record reflect that Mr. Johnson was wearing makeup. She then stated, Miss Petty's gonna be a good place now. The defendants had Mr. Johnson transferred from Building 18 back to Building 7, the most heavily gang-infested building in All Red that he had left already. Upon information and belief, defendants Bowman, Cuyava, and Rango knew about that severe problem and did it on purpose. During his first week back on Building 7, a member of the Crips gang forced Mr. Johnson to perform oral sex on him. The Tongos gang objected to this disrespect to their property and demanded $60 in commissary in payment from the Crips. Thereafter, members of the Mexican Mafia, the most powerful gang on Building 7, approached Mr. Johnson and told him that he must ride or die with them, meaning that only by accepting sexual slavery with one gang could he avoid being killed. The gangs began fighting over Mr. Johnson, and Mr. Johnson was told that
Look at them. Look at them. Look at them. But they all supposed to be gangsters, right? They all supposed to be G's. They all supposed to be official. Look at what they doing. Squabbling, fighting, going to war over another man's booty. And these are the people who young impoverished kids look up to, right? Right? Look at them. Fighting over a man's booty.
he must attend a gang meeting in a recreation yard where he'd be forced to choose which gang he would own him. Mr. Johnson filed another step on a grievance requesting safekeeping. On the last day of 2001, Mr. Johnson intentionally incurred a major disciplinary violation in an effort to avoid the choice between death or continual sexual servitude. He went to the recreation yard when not allowed to do so and intentionally gave a wrong cell number. On January 9th, he had a hearing by Captain Hargrove. Mr. Johnson told Hargrove about being forced into sexual slavery at Allred and informed them that he had intentionally gotten a disciplinary case in order to protect himself. Hargrove laughed and told Johnson that he would strip him of everything. Hargrove proceeded to give Mr. Johnson the maximum allowable punishment. Mr. Johnson received restrictions on recreation, commissary, and property, as well as custody in a special cell restraint for 45 days. His classification dropped to a line 3.
For what? For what?
Which will require him to remain in prison for another 2 years past the date which he was able to be released. Mr. Johnson was also sentenced to 15 days in solitary confinement. This 15 days in punitive segregation was the first and only protection he ever received at Allred. On January 17, 2002, Johnson went before the UCC on his 7th life endangerment claim. The committee consisted then of Attilo, Norwood, and Taylor. After Johnson pleaded his case, Norwood told him that Johnson probably consented to the sex act. Personally, I believe he liked it. All the defendants laughed at the comment. Norwood told Mr. Johnson he liked it.
Where's the professionalism? Where's the human compassion? It's bad enough he's already locked up. Could you corny ass cops at least do your job? Sick, man. I thought I was gonna have fun with this video. Now I'm tight.
I'm convinced you're in with this gang. I don't think you need no safekeeping. You need to be placed on high security. We don't have anything but one cellie, then you can get effed all the time, all day. Taylor then said Mr. Johnson's to be on medium custody. Learn to fight. Mr. Johnson then started sobbing uncontrollably, screaming and pleading with the defendants not to send him back to general population. They laughed. 2 officers then grabbed Mr. Johnson and grabbed him, kicking and screaming for help. The next day, prison officials issued a written denial of Mr. Johnson's grievance due to insufficient evidence.
They got off on his brother's pain. It was amusing to them. And the whole time they knew he was really suffering. But they didn't care. If he was Caucasian, he would have never had to deal with this. This video, this is crazy, yo.
Once prison officials released Mr. Johnson from solitary confinement and placed him on special cell restraint in Building 8,
He didn't deserve this, man.
Black and Hispanic gangs on the unit fought over him. Each claimed he was their property. Mr. Johnson received several threatening letters from inmate gang members addressing him as CoCo. Some of the letters threatened physical and sexual violence. Others warned that he had been pegged as a snitch and that he might as well do as you're told. Desperate to get help before he was off cell restriction and back in general population, Mr. Johnson began writing to the ACLU and other organizations. His family also attempted to advocate on his behalf. In 2002, his grandmother sent a life endangerment claim to the TDC ombudsman. On March 7th, the ombudsman office replied that they had investigated the claim and found no support for it. This is Tim Snow's commentary here. Never trust the ombudsman. They're trash. But anyway, on February 22nd, 2002, officials returned Mr. Johnson to general population in Building 8. That night, gang members assaulted Mr. Johnson and forced him to perform sex acts with other
Why do
inmates.
they keep sending him to Building 8?
Attacks continued the next day. In despair, Mr. Johnson did not report either attack. February 24, 2002, the Mexican Mafia claimed definitive ownership over Mr. Johnson. The same day, the gang sold him to another inmate who forced him to perform oral sex. While the Mexican Mafia owned Mr. Johnson, the sexual assaults and exploitation escalated dramatically. The gang sold him to scores of other inmates. Gang leaders in Building 8 negotiated with gang leaders in Building 7 for a fee of $5 to $10 in commissary for his sexual services. Gang leaders controlled his life and his body. They told him to whom he had been sold and what he must do for that inmate. They told him that if he refused, he'd be beaten or killed. As a sexual slave, he was repeatedly at the command of gang members. February 27, 2002, another Mexican gang bought Mr. Johnson's sexual service for a week. He was forced to perform sex acts on 8 inmates in a stairwell, in a shower, and in a cell. March 10th, a white inmate called MJ came to Mr. Johnson's cell. MJ said the Mexican Mafia sent him and told Mr. Johnson, "I already paid them. I don't want to F you, just suck my..." While MJ was demanding sex from Mr. Johnson, Sergeant Thomas discovered MJ in Mr. Johnson's cell and took MJ back to his assigned cell. Sergeant Thomas told MJ, "I don't care how you make your money, but I'm not tolerating on this car. And tell your pimp he better comply." Sergeant Thomas did not issue a disciplinary report against MJ. MJ came back later to finish up.
'Cause he was white.
On March 13th, on or around 12:30 a.m., an officer unlocked the door to Mr. Johnson's cell, allowing another inmate named JD to enter. JD told Mr. Johnson, "Some Mexican on 7 building sent me over. You know what it is." When Mr. Johnson balked at his request, JD told Mr. Johnson he had already paid for his services. JD forced Mr. Johnson to perform oral sex. On or about March 15th, the white gang leader on Mr. Johnson in the shower. The showers were completely unguarded, and this type of humiliating assault became commonplace for Mr. Johnson. From the time Mr. Johnson was returned from cell restriction to general population on February 22nd, 2002, inmate gang members on him in the shower a minimum of 30 times. He could not take a shower without other inmates on him every time.
Over 30 times. These gangsters beat off on him in the shower. What has this world come to?
On March 17, 2002, around 10:30 a.m., a Mexican mafia inmate called Monster approached Mr. Johnson in the day room and told him that he must go to the showers. When Mr. Johnson arrived, 8 or 9 other inmates were in the showers. Gang members also forced a mentally ill inmate named Alazar to the showers. The gang members then surrounded Mr. Johnson and Alazar and repeatedly forced Alazar to stick his finger in Mr. Johnson and lick it. Gang members then forced Alazar and Johnson to simultaneously bait each other in the shower while they watched.
Hey, yo!
Despite the multitude of horrors he had already experienced at All Red, the surrealistic and nightmarish nature of this show stunned Mr. Johnson. The gang members tried to force him to perform Mr. Alazar, but he refused. He was only spared this further degradation because of the other inmates relented when called to meal. However, gang members later pushed Mr. Johnson down the back stairwell as a punishment for refusing to comply to the orders. Immediately after the incident in the shower, Alazar, the mentally disturbed man, ran to the defendant, Lieutenant Paul, in the day room to beg for help. Alazar was hysterical, but defendant Paul refused to help him and ordered him to go away. Alazar then tackled the lieutenant and was hauled away on a disciplinary charge. When Mr. Johnson saw Paul after the meal, the lieutenant told him that he'd better not act like Alazar. He'd be carried off in a body bag. On March 23rd, Mr. Johnson returned from church to find a white inmate named Kevin already in his cell. Kevin told Mr. Johnson that he already paid for his services, and I'm not going to lose my money. Kevin then forced Mr. Johnson to perform oral sex on him. On March 7th, Bowman interrupted an attorney-client telephone call between Mr. Johnson and lawyers from the National Prison Project of the ACLU. Defendant Bowman ordered Mr. Johnson to get off the phone. Mr. Johnson was taken into a meeting in Defendant Boyle's office. Defendant Boyle told Mr. Johnson there was no concrete evidence to support his life endangerment claim, and that since he had not been stabbed or gutted, prison officials would not place him in safekeeping. Defendant Boyle then coerced Mr. Johnson into signing another form. Said, if you don't do it, we're really going to F you over. That same day, Mr. Johnson filed a grievance about the whole incident. On March 28, 2002, the ACLU sent a letter to Defendant Johnson regarding Mr. Johnson's situation and requesting that he have Mr. Johnson placed immediately in safekeeping in order to prevent further irreparable injury. On March 29th, the next day after receiving a copy of the ACLU's letter to Defendant Johnson, Major Bowman called Mr. Johnson to a meeting and told him that the ACLU don't run in this prison, and that Mr. Johnson deserved to have his ass kicked for this. And at the same meeting, Warden Treon said, the ACLU don't run my damn classification unit, sir. And Mr. Johnson better not say he was coerced into shit. Treon threatened Mr. Johnson, with your classification, I can send you to a terrible place. On April 1st, Mr. Johnson again went before the UCC committee. During the hearing, Defendant Wathan told Mr. Johnson, right now, we're recommending to transfer you, and you're going to see a good friend of ours in another unit. Defendant Wathan then told Mr. Johnson that he would not be placed on safekeeping at this new unit because he, Wathan, was recommending against it. Wathan, you're such a gentleman. April 5th, 2002, Gary Johnson notified the ACLU that due to his demeanor and orientation, Mr. Johnson would be transferred from All Red and placed in safekeeping. On or about April 10, 2002, more than 18 months after he first requested safekeeping, and after repeatedly requesting such protection due to being sexually assaulted hundreds of times, Mr. Johnson was transferred to the Michael unit and placed in safekeeping.
Finally.
On April 10th, at Mr. Johnson's initial classification hearing at the Michaels unit, a UCC member, Major Fox, announced that an acquaintance of his at All Red had put a note in Mr. Johnson's file stating that Mr. Johnson is a manipulator who makes false claims. Mr. Fox indicated that based on his note, he considers Mr. Johnson to be a troublemaker, and that if Mr. Johnson ever makes any trouble in Michael unit, he, Major Fox, will make sure that he's placed in close custody, the worst place they have. Because of his past sexual enslavement by gangs, and because gang members have branded him as a snitch, Mr. Johnson faces a substantial risk of further sexual assault, brutal beatings, and even death if he returned back to general population. Mr. Johnson remains in constant fear that prison officials will follow through with their threats to have him return back to general population in retaliation for petitioning for redress for his grievance. Because he was sexually assaulted hundreds of times at Allred without any means of protection, Mr. Johnson lives in constant dread that he may have HIV or hepatitis. Defendants have never offered him appropriate medical treatment, psychiatric care, or counseling. Defendants never ordered that any taken or conducted any investigation when he complained. So that's his entire lawsuit and claims. TDC officials or gang members? Which ones are worse?
Yeah.
Are they about the same? You start realizing that TDC is a gang by itself.
Well, there you have it. I mean, damn. This is the craziest stories I ever heard. I just started doing this series, man. Lord have mercy, man. It don't matter who you are, where you come from, how old you are. Anyone who's forced to beg someone and they didn't want to do it, and then repeatedly forced to do it, I feel sorry for those people. Because that creates PTSD, that creates depression. The brother Johnson, pause, but the brother whose name is Johnson, he didn't deserve that, man. And this just shows how corrupt prisons are, guards are, and how being a gangster is a myth. Every single one of these people from all of these gangs that did this to this brother are known as gangsters in the street. But look at what they do. They're degenerates. They take the lives of their own people. You know, they force women to sleep with them. They do bad things to children. They force men to sleep with them. They sell them off and, you know, beat them up if they don't want to do it. I don't know what happened after this thing, because this is the early 2000s. I don't know what happened after this lawsuit. But I hope this brother got at least $1 million, man. Even though to never take away the pain he felt, the trauma he went through. At least he'll be able to pay for some therapy. And he'll be able to pay to live comfortably, at least for the rest of his days. This is my first time ever watching a video from this channel called Texas Prison Stories. They got some heat, man. Go ahead and subscribe to this channel if you're new here. Subscribe to Texas Prison Stories, man. Like, share, comment, subscribe. Peace.